But I just think 2 weeks up here is a lot of time for you. None of you get it. Do you know what the secret of life is?
No.
This.
You finger?
One thing. Just one thing. You stick to that and everything else don't mean.
That's great. What's the one thing?
That's what you gotta figure out.
Do you love that movie? I just love that movie. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about what's your one thing. The gentleman that wrote this book, Keller, talks about when he was at his organization, they were quite successful. But they had reached a point where they really weren't growing, they weren't advancing, they weren't doing the things that he had hoped that they would do. And so, at one point, one of the things that actually he recommends in the book that you do is he recommends that you have a professional coach, that you have someone that you can talk to, or a mentor that you can talk with quite often. And he had a professional coach that he was working with, and he went and met with that professional coach, and he laid out everything that they were doing. This is what this VP is responsible for, this is what they're doing, this is how we're doing financially, this is what this VP is responsible for, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I don't know what to do. So the coach says, well, let me look at the data, let me analyze it for you, and let me see what I can come up with. And so he did just that. He went home, he analyzed all the data, he looked at it, and several days later they got back together. And he said, I think I figured out what you need to do. You need to do one thing. He had identified 14 people in the organization that he said all 14 of those people need to go. And he said, then you need to spend your time recruiting the best 14 people you possibly can to fill those positions. Keller went home, actually stepped down as president, put somebody else in that position, and for about 18 months he did nothing but figure out who were the right people to fill those 14 slots. And once he filled those 14 slots, the company continued to grow, continued to be successful. Because he spent essentially every day waking up in the morning for 18 months knowing exactly what he needed to focus on to make his organization successful. And that was having the right people on the bus in the right seat. That was his thing. That doesn't mean it's everyone's thing. Hollis told us yesterday what his one thing was. When he finally realized that he wasn't a basketball player, and he wasn't a football player, and he wasn't a baseball player, and he wasn't a track star in the traditional sense, that he was a high jumper, then he ate, slept, I shouldn't say drank, but ate and slept being a high jumper. He said he hung out with high jumpers. He studied how to high jump. He focused on nothing but high jumping. And as you heard him say, he did every little thing along the way, weightlifting, exercising, diet, all the things that would make him the most successful high jumper he could possibly be, because he had finally decided he knew what his one thing was. When you think about one thing, it's ignoring all the things you could do and focusing on the thing that you should do. Ignoring all the things that you could do and focusing on the thing that you should do. You need to do fewer things for more effect. I love this statement. Instead of doing more things with side effects. Need to do fewer things with more effect than lots of things with side effects. Most of us in our daily lives, especially in the profession that we're in healthcare, do lots of things. And we're going to talk about why that's difficult and why, in many instances, if we keep it up, we won't be successful as an individual or as an organization. Watch this for just a moment. It took us weeks to set up those dominoes in our office. In the book, it talks about something called the domino effect. And the idea is real simple. If you have something that you're going to focus on, and that's your singular focus, and it's a big deal, it's a big idea, and you want to be successful, then you have to take small steps. You actually have to break it down into small steps and small increments. And that's what the dominoes represent. What's step 1? What's step 2? What's step 3? If you hear a football coach, a professional or a college football coach, college is a great example, and you hear them talk about what they say to their players, they focus the conversation around what is the immediate next step. There was some statistics that were recently shown on ESPN where they talked about the number of football teams that actually ended the season as the national champs if they started out rated number 1 in the polls. The number of teams that actually finished as national champs if they started out ranked number 1 in the polls. And there's like one team in the last 25 or 30 years. Why? Because if you start out ranked number 1, then you're already thinking about the end, and you're not thinking about what? The first game. Coaches are always saying, we're not thinking about that. We're thinking about the game we're playing today. We're not thinking about that. We're thinking about the game we play tonight. We're not thinking about whether that player is going to receive the Heisman or not. We're thinking about what he is supposed to do in the game today. They know that if you set your sights and you are starting to focus on something that's way down the road, then you won't take care of the immediate business that you need to take care of, and you won't be successful. Another example. How many of you play golf? Oh, come on. Raise your hand. How many of you play golf? Or how many of you try to play golf? That's be more hands. That's more honest, okay? All right, well, if you want to be a professional golfer, or a college golfer like my daughter was, if you want to be a golfer, okay, then really to be good, you got to break it down, right? You got to figure out, how do I get good at a short game? So what do? You practice putting, and practice, and practice, and practice. And then you go and practice chipping, and work on your chipping game. And then you got to go work on your sand game. And then you go about 100 yards out, and you work on your game to hit that ball from that 100-yard marker onto that green. And then you go and you work on your long irons. And then you go and you work on your 3-wood. And then you go and you work on your driver. And you're not finished yet. You just started getting good at how you actually hit the ball. Now you got to go play, right? You got to go play a lot of matches and a lot of tournaments and a lot of different courses in order for you to understand, if I'm playing in the wind, do I hit the ball from the right to the left, or do I hit the ball from the left to the right? Depending on where the dog leg is, where do I need to place that ball? You have to practice. You take it in small incremental steps. The domino effect. What's the first domino, the second domino, the third domino? How do I learn this game in order to be successful to reach my goal? If you watch the Olympics and you watch the stories, which I think sometimes are as incredible as the events themselves. Do you remember the American backstroker that won the 100 and the 200 gold medal? Ryan is his name. The men have won those 2 backstroke events for the last 5 Olympics. But what's so incredible about that young man and how the domino effect was in his life? At 7 years old, he put a book together as a part of a school project. Everybody was to put a book together, a story that ultimately got given to their mothers. And he gave his mother his book at 7 years old. And that was the story of how he was going to become an Olympic gold medalist. 7 years old, he had his sights set on how he was going to do it. And he did it. Well, first he had to learn the backstroke, right? So he's got to learn the stroke. And if he learns the stroke, then you got to learn the technique, right? If you learn the technique, is your head a little bit up or is it down? What's your flip turn look like? When do you turn for a flip turn? How many strokes from the line that goes across do you actually flip over? Is it 3 strokes for you or is it 2.5? Every piece of that he had to learn. And then he had to get through high school and be competitive there. And then he had to get into college and be competitive there. And ultimately, he won 2 gold medals. He also raced against people throughout that continued to make him better. So he cut his time, right? Cut his time by 5 seconds and 10 seconds and then maybe 15 seconds as he moved through that process. The domino effect. How did he continue to take it one step at a time to get a little bit closer to where he wanted to go? Let's talk about organizations that you can think of that you would say, okay, these organizations focus on one thing. Intel. What's Intel's one thing? Microprocessor, right? That's their big deal.